You are now hovering just above the wreck site, a graveyard of ambition and imperial power, hundreds of meters down in the perpetually chilled water. The lights of our submersible cut through the murk, painting the seabed in stark, almost clinical detail. It feels less like an ocean and more like a vast, silent museum dedicated to the concept of deep time. This specific site, let's call it the Golden Sponge Reef, is nestled comfortably off the coast of Italy, a forgotten casualty of a bustling trade route during the height of the Roman Empire, probably around the 1st century CE. Imagine the ship itself. It was a lumbering honoraria, a Roman cargo vessel designed less for speed and more for stuffing every available cubic inch with goods, wine, olive oil, maybe some fancy ceramics for the elite in Rome, or perhaps silks and spices coming from the east. But the true, heavy heart of this particular wreck, the thing that drew us down through the water column, is what's left of the monetary cargo. We're talking about gold, specifically raw gold ingots or maybe coinage packed tight in wooden chests, the kind of bulk transfer that represented real, undeniable imperial wealth. This wasn't just someone's pocket money, this was a transfer of state funds or the wealth of a particularly ambitious merchant family, money meant to grease the wheels of an ever-expanding empire. The initial discovery, as often happens in the deep sea, wasn't a heroic treasure hunt, but rather a lucky accident, a simple anchor drag. Some poor fishing vessel, probably aiming for something entirely different, snagged its anchor on something unnaturally dense and rigid down below. When they retrieved the anchor, there was just enough oxidized metal and strange, encrusted rock to suggest something was there. And when the researchers finally sent a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, down to take a peek, they didn't find the majestic outline of a preserved ship. Instead, they found a strange, shimmering mound. The wood of the ship itself, which we'll get to in a moment, vanished centuries ago, leaving a core of dense, non-biodegradable wealth resting on the mud. It looks less like a shipwreck and more like a strange, glittering geological formation. The pressure down here is already intense, and you feel a strange sense of claustrophobia even inside the safety of our vehicle. You are the deepest thing for miles, the only source of artificial light. Speaking of light, if you were relying on sunlight right now, you'd be absolutely lost. The photic zone, that lovely sunlit layer where all the fun surface biology happens, is way, way above us. We're in the perpetual night of the bathyal zone. We know roughly when this ship sank, not just from the style of the amphory, those giant ceramic jars that held the wine and oil, but from the composition of the gold itself. Historians still debate whether the Roman economy was truly based on a gold standard or a bimetallic system, but what's clear is that this metal held massive value. One legitimate historical event that gives us context, the reign of Emperor Nero, 54 to 68 CE, saw huge fluctuations in gold and silver content in coinage, often done to fund his massive public works projects or, let's be honest, his incredibly expensive tastes. The purity level of the gold down below could act like a fingerprint, potentially linking this loss directly to a specific economic policy decision from Rome. It's the ultimate bureaucratic mishap, now encased in silence. I always wonder about the crew, too. Maybe they were running a little late on their route. Maybe they skipped a required maintenance check on the hull. You know how it is, it's just a short trip, she'll hold up fine. Famous last words, right? It makes me think of those old Roman jokes. Why did the Roman citizen get kicked out of the bathhouse? Because he tried to take a quick dip. Okay, I'll see myself out. One odd or unusual detail about these deep Mediterranean wrecks is the strange, almost magnetic attraction they seem to hold for the sea life, particularly the smaller, more obscure creatures. It's like the seabed, which is usually featureless mud, has suddenly sprouted a beacon. This concentration of hard, stable surfaces, metal, pottery, stone ballast provides the only stable real estate for miles. It's the deep sea equivalent of finding a free, pre-furnished apartment in Manhattan. And soon, we will see exactly who moved in. For now, just appreciate the density of this gold. The ship didn't just break up, it seems to have hit something hard, a reef or a submerged cliff, and its heavy, precious cargo simply plummeted, concentrating the wealth in a small, dense pile. The anchor drag that found it wasn't detecting the ghost of a wooden ship, it was detecting a massive, centuries-old gold and pottery landslide. It's why this wreck site is still there. If it had been lighter cargo, the currents would have scattered the evidence far and wide, erasing the tragedy entirely. But gold stays put. It waits. You shuffle along the floor of the submersible, peering out the viewport. You can already see glimmers of yellow, peeking out from beneath a fuzzy, white layer of biological material. This isn't just a pile of gold, it's the foundation of a new, strange colonial project, a world built on lost Roman tax revenue. That shimmering mound we saw, that core of Roman wealth, only exists because of the relentless, microscopic efficiency of the deep-sea cleanup crew. In the sunlit world, a wooden ship sinks, and within months, sometimes weeks, it's devoured by wood-boring clams and various hungry microbes. But down here, there's a strange, almost respectful decay. The culprit in the warm, upper waters is often the shipworm, or Teredo navalis, which isn't actually a worm, but a specialized saltwater clam. They tunnel through the wood, reducing the magnificent hull to sawdust and leaving behind a ghostly outline of where the ship once was. Down here, however, in the deeper, colder Mediterranean, their activity is vastly reduced, but still inevitable over the course of centuries. So, the first reason the gold is sitting in a neat pile is the fate of the wood. The planking, the mast, the deck, everything organic that wasn't instantly crushed or scattered, became a slow-motion meal. What remains of the ship is just the ballast stone, often simple rocks carried to stabilize the vessel, and, critically, the dense, heavy, non-biodegradable cargo. The gold, the amphory, the bronze fittings, they simply dropped to the seabed when the structure holding them together gave way, forming a compact, artificial hillock. It's like watching an ancient Roman accountant's worst nightmare, all the assets, perfectly inventoried, just sitting there in the dark. And now, let's talk about the star of the show, the sponge incrustation. As our submersible light sweeps over the pile, you can see that the gold and the pottery aren't shiny, they're obscured by a pale, often fuzzy coating. This is life reclaiming property. Deep-sea sponges, anemones, and tiny hydroids, the sessile fauna, have colonized this artificial reef. Think about it, the deep-sea floor is mostly soft, featureless mud. If you are an organism that needs a hard, stable surface to glue yourself onto, this mound of lost Roman capital is the most valuable piece of real estate for hundreds of miles. It's the equivalent of winning the deep-sea lottery, and the prize is a gold ingot to attach your base to. The most fascinating settlers here are the glass sponges, or Hexactinellida. These creatures are absolutely wild. Instead of using protein like their shallow water cousins, they build their intricate skeletons out of silica, essentially, glass. They are filter feeders, pumping water through their delicate, cathedral-like structures to capture the occasional drifting organic particle. You're looking at structures that are, biologically speaking, made of incredibly fine, complex glassware, and they're using Nero's gold as their foundation. That's just gentle cosmic sarcasm, isn't it? The symbol of human ambition and transient wealth is now just a convenient attachment point for something that exists purely to filter water. This symbiotic relationship leads to a strange form of preservation. The gold itself is practically inert, it doesn't rust or easily dissolve. But the pottery, the bronze coins, if there are any, and the iron tools are usually highly susceptible to corrosion. However, the presence of these sponges and the thick layer of organic matter they create can sometimes act as a buffer zone. This odd or unusual detail is that the biological colonization can slow down the process of chemical decay for underlying metals. It creates a microenvironment that is slightly different from the surrounding water, samadhi, sometimes limiting the oxygen available to accelerate rust. Essentially, the life growing on the wreck is paradoxically helping to preserve the non-precious historical artifacts, covering them in a protective, biological blanket. It's a beautiful cycle, really. The ship sinks, carrying wealth intended to create more life and more trade in the Roman world. It destroys hundreds of lives in the process. Then, centuries later, the remains of that lost wealth become the foundation of an entirely new ecosystem, supporting hundreds of new, non-human lives. It reminds me of that classic question, why did the deep-sea diver break up with his girlfriend? Because she was getting too clingy, and he needed his space. Alright, back to the sponges. The legitimate historical event that this wreck hints at is the infamous Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BCE, even though this wreck is much later. Why? Because the Punic Wars established Rome's dominance over the western Mediterranean, paving the way for the massive, relatively safe maritime trade that this honoraria was undertaking hundreds of years later. Without Rome's total naval control established through those brutal conflicts, a cargo ship carrying this much gold wouldn't have dared sail these waters. As for the academic debate, historians still debate whether the major trade routes of the Mediterranean shifted primarily due to geopolitical changes, like the fall of Egypt, or simply due to technological innovations in shipbuilding that allowed for larger, more efficient vessels. This wreck, a snapshot of a perfect moment in time, feeds into that discussion by showing us the sheer volume of goods that one of these large ships could carry. You watch as a small, pale crab, perhaps the size of your thumb, scuttles across the Golden Mound. It's moving slowly, deliberately. Everything is slowed down here. Life is measured in centuries, not seasons. It's hard to reconcile the rapid, frantic pace of Roman commerce, fueled by ambition and profit, with the sleepy, eternal stillness that now defines its grave. We're focusing on the gold right now, aren't we? It's hard not to. The sheer value represented by this compact pile is staggering, even 2 millennia later. But we need to understand the role of this metal in the Roman economy to grasp why someone risked shipping such a concentrated fortune. This gold wasn't just for fancy jewelry, though they certainly made a lot of that. The metal served 3 crucial functions: it underpinned the currency, it funded military expansion, and it settled massive international trade imbalances. Think about the sheer logistics of moving this kind of wealth. In the 1st century CE, the currency system relied heavily on coinage, with the gold aureus being the highest value denomination. This gold down here, whether already minted or in raw ingot form, massa, represented the state's hard power. Losing it wasn't just losing money, it was a potential hit to imperial confidence and the ability to pay the legions or finance essential infrastructure, like those famous Roman roads we keep hearing about. Imagine if a modern container ship carrying all the physical reserves of a small country just vanished. That's the scale of this disaster. One of the greatest drivers for shipping this much gold was trade with the East, particularly along the Silk Road. The Roman appetite for exotic goods, spices from India, silk from China, and even luxury perfumes, was insatiable, but the empires of the East were often less interested in Roman wine or olive oil. They wanted one thing: gold. So, the gold flowed out, and the luxury goods flowed in. This particular wreck, sitting in the Mediterranean, suggests it was likely a shipment either heading to a major eastern port like Alexandria, or perhaps returning from a large acquisition with raw material. It's a tragic economic footnote: the cost of a luxurious Roman dinner, now feeding a sponge colony. The deep sea environment, incredibly hostile to life, is paradoxically a fantastic preservation chamber for metal, especially gold. Gold is non-reactive, meaning it doesn't oxidize or rust like iron or silver. It sits there, unbothered by the cold water or the lack of oxygen, waiting patiently. This is an odd or unusual detail for something so tied to human history. Its chemical apathy gives it eternal life. You can picture the Roman official who commissioned this shipment, worried sick about pirates or storms. He never considered that, 2,000 years later, his carefully accounted for gold would be less valuable to humans than it is to a sedentary deep-sea creature looking for a cozy place to settle down. Let's pause for a moment for a bit of light-hearted distraction. You know why Roman centurions always carried a loaf of bread? Because they needed the need of the hour. Okay, I'll stick to the deep sea, which is slightly less cheesy than that joke. We are still in the bathyal zone, and the cold is absolute. The average temperature down here is barely above freezing, around 4 degrees Celsius 39 degrees Fahrenheit. This persistent, bone-chilling cold is another factor in preservation, slowing down all chemical and biological processes dramatically. This deep chill is one of the reasons that when the legitimate historical event of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE happened, the artifacts in Pompeii and Herculaneum were preserved so remarkably well by ash. The deep ocean acts like the ash, only colder, creating a slow-motion freeze-frame of history. As we maneuver closer, you notice a specific ingot peeking through the white sponge fuzz. It looks dense, heavy, and totally inert. This isn't just a relic, it's a time capsule. Historians still debate whether the continuous debasement of the silver currency, denarius, by emperors like Nero eventually led to a total reliance on gold and a corresponding flight of wealth, contributing to Rome's later economic struggles. This lost cargo is a physical manifestation of that wealth flow, suggesting a highly centralized system where massive transfers of capital were common practice. Remember that sponge colony from the last section? It has grown thicker here, almost like a natural insulation blanket over the metal. This growth demonstrates the core truth of deep-sea wrecks: they are not just static sites of history, but dynamic ecosystems. The dense pile of gold provides not just an attachment point, but a localized area of slightly different chemistry, often attracting specific kinds of microbes that process the slight decay of surrounding materials. It's an underwater skyscraper, built by disaster. You reach out a gloved hand and gently tap the viewport. The gold is right there, within touching distance if the sub permitted it. It's a surreal moment, realizing that the ultimate goal of Roman expansion, the accumulation of wealth, now serves as the ultimate anchor for life in the darkest, most desolate part of the sea. The gold may have been meant for palaces and armies, but its final, ironic purpose is to provide footing for a bunch of tiny, glass skeleton filter feeders. The story of the Roman gold, sunk deep into the Mediterranean mud, takes a modern twist when we talk about its discovery. As noted, this wasn't some planned, big-budget expedition searching for Caesar's lost lunch money. It was, rather, a beautiful, slightly clumsy accident, often the way the deep sea reveals its secrets. Imagine the scene: a fishing trawler, miles from shore, working an area they've worked 100 times before. The tension on the line suddenly spikes. They're not just snagged on a rock, this is different. It's too heavy, too concentrated. When they finally manage to retrieve the line, perhaps finding just a few highly corroded metal fragments or a piece of pottery unlike anything they usually dredge up, the seed of curiosity is planted. They report the location, maybe reluctantly, because who wants the government poking around their fishing grounds? This initial clue leads to the deployment of an ROV, remotely operated vehicle. This is where you come in, watching through the ROV's camera. The monitor flickers to life, transitioning from the featureless, dark blue of the open water to the muddy, monochrome seabed. Then, the lights hit the anomaly. It's not just a collection of rusty scrap. The camera focuses on a dense pile of amphora necks, and weaving around them, glittering faintly beneath a blanket of sediment and life, is the unmistakable yellowish gleam of gold. It's an instant rush, that sudden, electrifying realization that you are the first human eyes, however remote, to see something that has been lost to history for 2,000 years. It's the closest you get to time travel, without the inherent nausea. This is an odd or unusual detail of deep-sea discovery. Often, the most valuable things are found by people looking for the most mundane things. We spend millions on dedicated surveys, and yet, a humble fishing line or a routine pipelaying survey often stumbles upon the spectacular. It makes you wonder how much historical wealth and knowledge is simply resting beneath us, waiting for a slightly misplaced anchor. The legitimate historical event that often parallels these discoveries is the finding of the Antikythera mechanism off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1900. It wasn't found by academic archaeologists, but by sponge divers. They were seeking sponges, and instead, they found a shipwreck containing what is now recognized as the world's oldest known analog computer, a device so complex it rewrote the history of ancient Greek technology. Our gold site, though chemically simpler, shares the narrative arc, the mundane search yielding a profound historical marvel. Let's be honest, finding gold underwater sounds like the plot of a terrible action movie, which brings me to my next point. Why did the Roman emperor fire his treasury official? Because he wasn't making enough sense. Thank you, I'll be here all week. The deep-sea environment plays a crucial role in why the discovery remained intact until modern times. Had this wreck happened closer to the coast, in shallower, warmer, oxygen-rich waters, it would have been totally dispersed by strong currents, looted by ancient or medieval salvagers, or simply pulverized by continuous seismic activity and erosion. Down here, however, it was protected by the cold, the dark, and the crushing pressure. This protection leads us back to the ethical questions. Historians still debate whether the deep sea should be treated as a global archive, preserved for science and public benefit, or if it falls under a modified finders-keepers rule, especially when multi-million-dollar salvage operations are required to recover the goods. The gold we are looking at is a perfect flashpoint for this debate. Should it be catalogued and preserved in situ, or should it be brought up and displayed, thereby removing it from the historical context that has preserved it? For now, the sponges have made the decision easy. They are the true guardians of this Roman secret. That thick, white, biological layer acts as both a protective sheath and a biological barrier. It's essentially a 2,000-year-old squishy safety deposit box, and the inhabitants are filter feeders who work for free. You shift your attention from the gold to a nearby amphora. Unlike the gold, the ceramic jar is heavily encrusted, its original reddish clay color now obscured by life. This transition from shiny, inert metal to bio-covered pottery perfectly encapsulates the irony of this deep-sea archive. Human wealth is untouched, human craftsmanship is fully colonized. It's a silent testimony to the ocean's indifference to our history and our economy. It's simply repurposed the debris. Now that we've established that the gold is merely a very expensive piece of deep-sea scaffolding, let's talk about the organisms that have claimed it, the sponge colony itself. They are, quite frankly, the ocean's most successful squatters. They don't just attach to the gold, they integrate it into their lives, using the Roman artifacts as the structural bedrock for their slow, deliberate existence. If you look, the deep-sea sponges here are likely species of glass sponges. Remember those silica skeletons, or perhaps some type of scleractinian, stony, sponge, characterized by their incredible longevity. An odd or unusual detail about these deep-sea dwellers is their age. While a clam can live for 500 years, a fact we'll visit later, some deep-sea glass sponges are estimated to live for thousands of years. Yes, you are looking at creatures that might have started growing when the ship was still just an annoying memory for a Roman insurance agent, and they are still filtering water today. They are literally time machines, built on a foundation of lost history. Their filtration method is surprisingly gentle for something so crucial to their survival. They aren't active hunters, they are passive filter feeders, simply waiting for the drizzle of marine snow, the detritus falling from the surface waters, to drift past. They filter out microscopic organic particles, doing the slowest, most patient dining in the world. It makes me wonder about their dating scene. Why did the deep-sea sponge break up with the clam? Because they just weren't filtering things through properly. Too technical? Maybe. The irony here is that the presence of the gold, a substance meant to represent fluid, easily exchanged wealth, has created a biological choke point that supports life that moves, thinks, and grows at an almost geological pace. This legitimate historical event of the shipwreck, which was a moment of catastrophic speed, a hull splintering, water rushing in, has resulted in an ecosystem defined by maximum deceleration. Let's talk briefly about the chemical reactions. The gold is fine, but the bronze and iron components, like structural fasteners or certain tools, are slowly corroding. The surrounding environment, however, which includes the biological mass of the sponges, acts in complex ways. Sometimes, the waste products or metabolic activity of the microbes associated with the sponges can slightly alter the $text, pH, and oxygen levels immediately around the metal. Historians still debate whether the rate of corrosion in deep-sea environments is primarily determined by oxygen availability or by the specific biological activity of the microbial film, biofilm, that covers the artifacts. This sponge colony is a living, slow-motion experiment into that very question. The sponges might be accelerating the corrosion of some of the bronze but slowing the deterioration of certain fragile organic elements trapped beneath them. You observe the scene through the submersible's reinforced viewport. The atmosphere is quiet, broken only by the hum of our instruments. It's important to remember that this isn't a static museum display. This is a thriving, dynamic reef, a foundation of civilization's failure supporting a successful non-human colony. We are just temporary visitors to a world that has repurposed human tragedy into biological stability. The deep-sea sponges here are likely species of glass sponges. Remember those silica skeletons, or perhaps some type of scleractinian, stony, sponge, characterized by their incredible longevity. An odd or unusual detail about these deep-sea dwellers is their age. While a clam can live for 500 years, a fact we'll visit later, some deep-sea glass sponges are estimated to live for thousands of years. Yes, you are looking at creatures that might have started growing when the ship was still just an annoying memory for a Roman insurance agent, and they are still filtering water today. They are literally time machines, built on a foundation of lost history. Their filtration method is surprisingly gentle for something so crucial to their survival. They aren't active hunters, they are passive filter feeders, simply waiting for the drizzle of marine snow, the detritus falling from the surface waters, to drift past. They filter out microscopic organic particles, doing the slowest, most patient dining in the world. It makes me wonder about their dating scene. Why did the deep-sea sponge break up with the clam? Because they just weren't filtering things through properly. Too technical? Maybe. The irony here is that the presence of the gold, a substance meant to represent fluid, easily exchanged wealth, has created a biological choke point that supports life that moves, thinks, and grows at an almost geological pace. This legitimate historical event of the shipwreck, which was a moment of catastrophic speed, a hull splintering, water rushing in, has resulted in an ecosystem defined by maximum deceleration. Let's talk briefly about the chemical reactions. The gold is fine, but the bronze and iron components, like structural fasteners or certain tools, are slowly corroding. The surrounding environment, however, which includes the biological mass of the sponges, acts in complex ways. Sometimes, the waste products or metabolic activity of the microbes associated with the sponges can slightly alter the $text, pH, and oxygen levels immediately around the metal. Historians still debate whether the rate of corrosion in deep-sea environments is primarily determined by oxygen availability or by the specific biological activity of the microbial film, biofilm, that covers the artifacts. This sponge colony is a living, slow-motion experiment into that very question. The sponges might be accelerating the corrosion of some of the bronze but slowing the deterioration of certain fragile organic elements trapped beneath them. You observe the scene through the submersible's reinforced viewport. The atmosphere is quiet, broken only by the hum of our instruments. It's important to remember that this isn't a static museum display. This is a thriving, dynamic reef, a foundation of civilization's failure supporting a successful non-human colony. We are just temporary visitors to a world that has repurposed human tragedy into biological stability. We can see the ultimate result of a moment of failure down below. You can imagine the crew, probably a mix of experienced sailors, slaves, and perhaps a small contingent of guards to protect this valuable cargo. They were relying on primitive navigational tools, maybe a compass, maybe a sounding line to check depth near the coast, but mostly, they relied on dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed and time, and the stars. Why did the Roman navigator fail his final exam? Because he kept running aground on the answers. It's funny because it's terrifyingly true for these ancient mariners. The amphorae scattered around the gold provide a vital clue to the trade patterns. They are the Roman world's barcode, telling us where the wine came from and when it was made. Historians still debate whether the Roman imperial government actively subsidized certain trade routes or if the vast majority of shipping, even of high-value goods, remained entirely in the hands of private merchant guilds. If this was a state shipment, the amphorae might be stamped with imperial marks. If it was private, the stamps would point to a specific, wealthy merchant family who just suffered a colossal loss. The deep-sea environment, while preserving the artifacts, also blurs the immediate evidence of the ship's final moments. We can't see the shattered hull, but the way the ballast and gold are piled suggests a violent, rapid sinking. An odd or unusual detail often found at Roman wreck sites is the presence of small, personal items belonging to the sailors, perhaps a carved bone dice, a piece of jewelry, or even a specific kind of religious amulet. These tiny artifacts, often found trapped beneath the ballast stones, are incredibly powerful. They transform a faceless tragedy of imperial economics into a moment of human panic, a snapshot of someone's last desperate seconds trying to grab a prized possession before the cold water rushed in. As our light gently illuminates the mounds of gold and the thriving life it supports, you realize this site is a dual testament to the incredible logistical success of the Roman Empire, which managed to move this much wealth across the hostile sea for centuries, and to the eternal, quiet power of the ocean, which, in a single moment of storm or navigational error, instantly rendered all that human effort meaningless. The gold was supposed to buy more empire, instead, it bought a foundation for deep-sea sponges. Our journey through the deep silence now turns towards the complex issue of deep-sea mining and resource conflict. It's the modern ambition that threatens this ancient, fragile peace. The presence of the Roman gold beneath the sponge colony is a tiny, historical footnote to the massive, untapped mineral wealth that lies scattered across the entire global seabed. We're talking about polymetallic nodules, cobalt-rich crusts, and seafloor massive sulfides, deposits rich in copper, nickel, manganese, and rare earth elements, all vital for modern technology, especially batteries and green energy systems. The drive to mine these resources is enormous, creating a massive geopolitical and environmental conflict. On one side are nations and private corporations arguing that these deep-sea minerals are necessary to fuel the energy transition and avoid terrestrial mining conflicts. On the other side are environmentalists and many scientists who point out that deep-sea ecosystems, like our sponge-encrusted Roman treasure, are incredibly slow-growing and vulnerable, and that mining will cause irreversible damage to the last truly wild parts of the planet. This resource conflict often centers around the legal status of the ocean floor. The legitimate historical event that established some semblance of control was the creation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, in 1982. This treaty established the International Seabed Authority, ISA, an intergovernmental body tasked with regulating mineral-related activities in the vast area of the seabed beyond national jurisdiction, the area. This agreement is the ultimate framework for this current conflict, trying to balance resource exploitation with environmental protection. You might be thinking, what does this have to do with Roman gold? Everything. The gold site, while protected by its historical status and relatively shallow depth compared to the true abyssal plains, represents a concentrated, high-value deposit that was lost to history. Modern mining targets are vast, low-grade deposits, but the underlying drive is the same: the insatiable human desire to extract valuable, non-renewable material from the deep. An odd or unusual detail is that the potential technology used to harvest these deep-sea nodules, giant, seafloor vacuum cleaners, could generate massive plumes of sediment. Scientists worry that these plumes could drift for hundreds of kilometers, smothering filter feeders like our beloved gold-anchored sponges and disrupting the entire food web for years. So, the tiny particles of food that feed our ancient sponges could be replaced by clouds of deadly, suffocating dust stirred up by modern mining equipment. This conflict perfectly frames the ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate whether the current global push for deep-sea mining represents a responsible final frontier for resource acquisition or simply the inevitable, extractive continuation of historical colonial practices applied to the only territory left unexplored. The moral argument hangs heavy over the silent deep. Let's lighten the mood slightly before we go full existential dread. Did you hear about the deep-sea mining engineer who failed his performance review? He wasn't producing enough or some results. As we drift above the sponge colony, you can see how its structure provides shelter for smaller mobile life, making the historical debris a focal point for the ecosystem. If this area were designated for mining, this entire living foundation, the history, the biology, the structure, would be scraped away, leaving a sterile, muddy scar. The Roman tragedy was a singular, accidental loss. Modern mining would be a calculated, large-scale erasure. The difference between an economic accident and an economic strategy is often simply the scale of the damage. We're still floating above the silent wealth, the hum of our submersible the only indication of the modern world intruding on this ancient scene. Now, let's leave the human ambition, both Roman and modern, and focus on the geology that frames this narrative. While the Mediterranean is vast, our golden sponge reef sits in a basin that has a dramatic and violent geological past. The forces that shaped the seabed here directly influenced the fate and preservation of the Roman wreck. The Mediterranean is a remnant of the ancient Tethys Ocean, and its modern formation is the result of the collision between the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. This ongoing, slow-motion crunching created the deep trenches and basins where our wreck lies, making this sea prone to seismic activity. A small, localized underwater earthquake could have easily triggered a landslide that destabilized the Roman ship, or perhaps the sinking itself was the result of a tsunami generated by a tremor. An odd or unusual detail related to the geology here is the Messinian salinity crisis. Roughly 5.9 to 5.3 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea temporarily dried up, leaving behind massive deposits of salt and gypsum, turning it into a hypersaline desert. While this happened long before the Romans, the layers of salt deep beneath the seabed influenced the current geological stability and density of the basin floor. When we talk about how heavy the gold is, remember it's resting on layers of compressed, ancient salt and mud, a foundation that once baked dry under the sun. The wreck site is nestled, not in a deep abyssal plain, but on the slope of a continental margin, a region characterized by steep gradients. This is a crucial detail, because if the ship sank on a gentle slope, the contents would have scattered dramatically. The concentrated pile of gold and amphory suggests it sank quickly in a location that facilitated a rapid, vertical descent, likely near a sharp drop-off caused by regional fault lines. The legitimate historical event that draws our attention back to the region's volatility is the 1908 Messina earthquake and tsunami. While far removed from the Roman era, this event, which devastated parts of Sicily and mainland Italy, proved that the Mediterranean remains geologically active and capable of unleashing catastrophic underwater events. For ancient mariners,